If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what's your eeriest glitch in the Matrix or inexplicable experience? I had just turned 22 and my parents had sold their house and purchased a place out in the country. On the property there was a big shed not far from the house that I decided to turn into my place. Now I felt kind of uncomfortable in the shed sometimes, but my dog kept me company, so it wasn't so bad. Anyway, I had been in there maybe 2 weeks, and one night I'm on the computer, my dog asleep at my feet, and I need to pee, so I get up and go outside to piss. It's a beautiful clear night and the stars were incredible. Next thing I hear the shed door slam behind me. I turn immediately and try to open it, but it won't budge. Now from inside the shed I can hear my dog start to growl, quietly at first then louder. Now he's barking and I'm panicking trying to get the door open. I must mention that I'm 6'5" and well built, play sports etc., but even ramming my full weight into the door won't open it, and I'm really panicking now as my dog's barks turned into whines, then whimpering, then silence, and with all my might I slam into the door and it flies open. The light is off inside now and it's pitch black, it won't turn back on and I'm in complete darkness. Can't see my dog anywhere and I stumble around trying to find a torch. Finally I find it and pick it up and turn on my torch, and I wasn't prepared for what I'd see next. My dog had literally squashed itself into the furthest, darkest corner of the room, eyes closed, and is shaking violently. I immediately moved towards him, and as soon as I got within reach of him, he leapt at me into my arms and wouldn't move. I picked him up and I swear I've never ran so fast in my goddamn life. I never stepped foot in that shed ever again, and my dog wouldn't even go near that part of the property. When I was like 10 or 11 I was going to the beach with my aunt and her friends. There were 2 cars of us. To get there we had to go through a very large industrial area. We didn't know the direction, so our car was following the other. Suddenly, they did an unexpected turn, and so our driver had to take a sharp bend. In that moment we heard a very clear, loud voice inside the car saying, "Laughing sharp bend? The driver immediately hit the brakes. We looked at each other, puzzled. We all recognized it as a voice not belonging to any of us. In the very same time, we noticed that the other car has stopped as well. The other driver got out of the car with a scared face and shouted to us, Did you hear that as well?" They heard the very same thing inside their car. The area around was full deserted. It started off me waking up in bed during a thunderstorm. As the room illuminated again and again from the flashes of lightning outside, I realized that the bed I was laying in wasn't mine. The head of the bed was against the wall that the door was located on, and from my perspective I couldn't tell if it was open or closed. That is until I saw the face. At first, just the nose and jaw broke past the door frame, but then an entire face slowly passed through the doorway. I tried to yell, "Who the duck are you? Where the duck am I?" But it felt like I had lost my voice. No matter how hard I tried to scream, nothing came out, and this person continued to enter the room, looking dead ahead, away from me. Then, just as the person was completely into the room, their head snapped towards me, and it locked eyes with mine. I tried to get out of the bed, but felt completely paralyzed. The person started making their way to me, but with every step their body contoured in ways that would break a normal person's bones. Their neck snapped so the back of their head touched their back, their jaw lay flat on their chest, their arms had broken at the shoulders and migrated to their back like wings. Just terrifying shit. And just before they reached me, I woke up. The next day I told my mom about it, and went into great deal about the room. Turns out it was almost an exact copy of my room when I was a baby. We moved out of that house when I was super young, like I have no idea what the insides to any room look like. Just kinda weird, I guess. As I type this I'm already feeling deja vu. I've always wanted to share this part of my life with someone but have never been able to. So, I'll just tell a bunch of people on the internet. One day I was walking to work and all of a sudden had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in a big city. It was a strange spur of the moment urge to walk a different way that changed my life forever. I turned into an alley I had never seen before. As I remember it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore, just that I was a semi-conscious entity floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden, in the array of different colors and shapes, a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange-looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned to black. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick, and severely disturbed/depressed. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced any hallucinations, never have had anything like this happen to me. The weird thing is, when the glitch was correcting itself and I could see those people watching me like a caged animal, I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day. When I was a teenager, I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's Don't Cry to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her, and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang, and it was real-life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and shit. Up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes, I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away, and then after a very long pause she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her. So she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there she was unconscious, but alive. Today she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay. I am from Finland, and that's also where these things I'm about to describe to you happened. This was some years ago, pre-smartphone/GPS era. It was the end of the summer and myself and 2 friends were on a camping trip way up in the north, in Lapland. The mosquito season was over, and the weather was cooling down in anticipation of the coming fall. The 3 of us had packed food and gear for a 10-day trek. The car we arrived in had been left at the parking lot of a visitor center. This happened within the premises of the Urho Kekkonen National Park, a 985 square mile stretch of wilderness near the Russian border. The terrain there varies greatly, from treeless and semi-mountainous to dense forest of spruce and pine and dwarf birch. There are lots of swamps. Seeing reindeer is not uncommon and some nights you might hear wolves in the distance. You can run into a bear or a wolverine in this place, but of course normally they avoid people. We mostly camped in a tent, but some nights we used shelters and simple huts provided for travelers free of charge. The trip had lasted 5 days. We were at the furthest of any kind of civilization we were going to be on that particular outing, truly in the middle of nowhere. There really is nothing there. There are no villages, towns or industry. The place is a national park after all. Seeing other hikers happen from time to time. You'd see some people in the distance maybe. Very rarely would you come face to face with anyone. So, in the middle of our trip, we were camped in a small clearing, woodland extending around us for a considerable distance in all directions. It was already dark, we had eaten our evening meal and all 3 of us were jammed in our only tent. It was a bit cramped but we fit. We took turns carrying it during the hikes. We were just exchanging some jokes and crude humor in the dark, like guys in their 20s do, about to go to sleep in our sleeping bags. When we quieted down we began to hear it, talking. And the sound of machinery. Given our location, this was profoundly weird. We camped in a tent because there were no huts nearby. Maybe there was another camp somewhere near us? We couldn't quite make out what was being said, but it was a human voice, no doubt about it. But nothing really could explain the sound of heavy machinery. It sounded like an excavator or a tank, something big, powerful, and really not too far away. Combined with the sound of talking, we thought construction yard. But at that time of night, in an unpopulated, protected nature reserve? We got out of our tent. It was cold and pitch black, the campfire had some coals STLL glowing. We took out our flashlights. My 2 buddies have always been a lot braver than me. The sound was clearly coming from the north, maybe half a kilometer away. We thought the construction might be going on behind a small hill some distance away. We could see no lights or anything. We still could not make out what was being said. The speaking like voice was monotonous, and it was impossible even to say what language was being used. Still sounded a lot like a person speaking though. You may be aware of the sort of spooky phenomenon of hearing a human voice in static? Maybe you've used a blow dryer and been sure someone is talking, turn it off and it was just something the brain tried to interpret from the steady hum. Maybe it was sort of like that, it's hard to explain. The machinery-like sound continued, not loud, but you could sort of make out the powerful engine, at times accelerating/adding power, at times at idle. My 2 friends resolved to go find out what was going on. We put our warm clothes back on, donned boots and I sat next to the dying fire, adding some more wood to it. I would stay at camp while my buddies left to check out this mystery construction yard in the middle of nowhere in the Lapland woods. So, there I sat. The guys took out their maps, took a compass heading and left, and I could hear them make their way through the forest, see the light from their flashlights. Then they were gone. The weird sounds continued, unaltered. They were gone 15 minutes, then maybe 30. Then the better part of an hour. It was odd, judging by the volume of the sound. They should have reached it, checked it out and been back already. I added more firewood, and tried to make out what the person talking was saying, but it was too tinny and obscure. The guys had been away for over 2 hours. I figured they had stayed for coffee with the construction guys or something. Then the sound stopped. Just like that. It just ended, all at the same time. The engine sound and the voice both just quit. It was very silent. I waited for another 30 minutes, very worried now that something had happened, that maybe my friends were lost. Should I go and try to find them? I shouted their names several times, and built the fire pretty big. I was scared shitless when suddenly I saw the flashlights of my friends. Apparently they were returning in a hurry. The guys got back to camp, out of breath. They told me the following: they had followed the sound beyond the small ridge in the distance. There was nothing there, and it seemed like they were not getting any closer to the source of the sounds. They had to stop every now and then, be quiet and listen to it to be able to walk towards it. They walked and stopped like this for some time, then realized they were not getting any closer. The sounds did not change in volume at all. They decided to go just a bit further several times, when suddenly the sound just stopped like someone pressed a button on a recording. They realized they had been going on for a long time. They were in the middle of the dark woods, alone. They reversed the heading and started back at a brisk pace. Eventually they saw my big-ass fire from the top of a hill and found their way back. The weird thing is, we seemed to think the sound stopped at different times. They had been gone 2,5 hours in total. They said the sound stopped at around the 1 hour 15 minutes mark after they left. They then started to head back immediately, return trip taking a bit longer even though they kept a good pace. They apparently wandered around a bit. For me, the sound stopped at the 2-hour mark, just 30 minutes before they returned. We did not sleep that night. Nothing more happened on that trip, and we never found out what the weird construction yard-like sound was about. When we returned to the park's visitor center some 5 days later, we asked around, but no one knew of any ongoing construction taking place in the whole national park area. Been bugging me ever since. 10 years ago I was retuning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later we came around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that the road was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car, no lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped, and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a spilt second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar, though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I am missing an hour of my life, and to this day have no idea how it happened. Setting: acid trip when I was 25 or so, at this really cool music festival called Rustlers Valley, in the mountains in the east of South Africa. So, at the time I was taking a fair amount of acid, really enjoying what it did to my mind, but not really enjoying the actual trips at all. Mentally they were really hard work. I eventually figured out acid was not very good for me, personally. Anyway, early that night, going up, I was sitting somewhere, with someone, on the ground next to one of the stages. At some point I became aware of someone standing in front of me, looking at me. For some reason it gave me the most extreme chills, and I couldn't look directly at this person at all. I wanted to get up and leave, but somehow that just felt like a completely wrong thing to do. The person eventually walked away, after what felt like a really long time. The night went its course after that, and like any old acid trip, turned out to be several successive trips between hell and Valhalla. Much later, early morning hours, coming down, I walked around aimlessly, and got to this spot next to one of the stages, where I spotted someone wearing the same jeans as I did, which was kind of unlikely, because I used to make my own jeans from very bright and busy curtain fabric in those days. As I got closer, I realized it was me, from earlier that night. I stopped in front of myself, trying to figure out what to do with this bombshell, and then noticed how uncomfortable I was making earlier me, and ended up just wandering off, completely freaked out. After that trip, I still took mushrooms quite often. They always agreed with me, but that was my last acid trip ever. It was early 2000s, it is 3 a.m. and my house phone starts ringing. The phone was on the other side of the room. I stand up on the bed and start heading for the low dresser to answer it, and my wife gets up to go get the phone as well. By this time it is the third ring and I remember thinking, crap, it's going to go to voicemail. The ringing stops. My cell phone starts ringing. I immediately change gears to someone really needs to get hold of me. I grab my phone, caller ID is all zeros. I answer hello? And a voice comes through the line as though it was a distant overseas call, parting through the static and asking, is this Joel? To which I reply, yes, who is this? Immediately it was as though those words, is this Joel, were being pulled back through the line, echoing in reverse. There was static and the call dropped. Jump forward several years. I'm installing a phone system that we're joking around is so advanced that we could place calls back in time. I punch in my old phone number and call it, realizing that number is still active and my wife might answer. I hang up and call my now years old and retired phone number. Somebody answers, I freak out and ask, is this Joel? The voice on the other end of the line answers, through space and time, yes, who is this? At that instant, I immediately remember taking the call and I am struck dumb. I cannot speak. Without thinking, I press the hang up button. I am now freaked out. I look over to my colleague who isn't as freaked out as I am. From his perspective, I called a number and someone with the same name answered. But he realized, that was my voice on the other end of the line. I told him I got that call. It was 5 years ago, but I got that call. Then we both freak out. I hit redial and get a message that number is no longer in service. I call my home number back and my wife answers. I tell her I'm testing a phone system and ask if she had any previous calls. Nope, none. I'm kinda freaking out, but with her on speakerphone, I ask her, hey, do you remember that 3 a.m. phone call we got all those years back? Yes. Where I was asked, is this Joel? And the line went dead? Yes. I'm now just looking at my colleague, with my wife still on speakerphone. Do you remember what year that was? It was before we had kids, so it would have had to have been 2002 timeframe. I don't know how to say this, I'm pretty sure that was me that called. I had a recurring dream as a child. I've had it in my lifetime at least 20 to 30 times between the ages of 5 to 13. I'm now 22. The dream would start out with me awakening from bed and standing up, and seeing 2 identical black cats sitting on my desk. I'd get the feeling in the dream that one cat was evil, and one was good. Sometimes in my dream I'd run outside or out of my room to try and get away, but they'd always reappear in front of me. So, I was stuck with picking one. I'd always pick the wrong one and it would turn into some sort of creature and kill, eat, or tickle me to death. I hated tickles in my dreams as a child. I never told anyone about this dream growing up. One morning, my sister told me she had a creepy dream with me in it. She said that she had a dream where she was outside in our front yard and there were these 2 black cats. She could tell one was evil and one was good. In her dream, I came flying out of our house, screaming at her, saying, don't pick them. They're both evil and you'll never get the right one. She picked one up, and the other cat ran away. When she told me this in the morning, my face turned white, like I saw a ghost. So weird, and even weirder that I was in her dream, yelling at her to run. I was like maybe 5 or 6 years old then, living in some sort of compound apartments, where all our other relatives reside, and there's this one time that my aunt and uncle are going to a mall, along with my mother. So all went normal. I was left with the house help, maid, and she fed me lunch. Then afterwards she took a nap in the sofa and I was sitting on the floor playing with stuff. Then the weirdest thing happened. I glanced at the maid. She was lying on her side on the sofa, with her hands like a praying position on one side of the cheek, you know, that kind of sleep position, and all of a sudden her face started changing. I ducking kid you not, it was like in those movies where there's a slow transition of something changing into another, like soft blurring or overlapping their faces, but I can clearly see it. As the transition completes, she changed into my mother. Remember that my mom went with my aunt and uncle to the mall. Now I'm in the living room floor, looking at my mother sleeping. I don't know what just happened. Then when the time she woke up, it was like nothing, as if everything was normal. When my aunt and uncle came back, they were with the maid. I was dumbfounded. There were moments in my life that I still tell her about what happened and she just won't believe me. Maybe in my whole existence, 30 years/0 now, I told her about the transition of her I witnessed multiple times, mostly when the incident was still fresh and up until my high school days, and all she responded to me was in a tone like I was only talking nonsense but in a jokingly manner, not angry at me or whatever. Even now when I try to tell her about that experience, she still remembers how I rambled about it ever since. So I'm sure she still knows I'm very consistent of what I saw. When I was about 15 years old, I went over to my cousin's house to play some video games. I had just got Super Mario Sunshine and had been playing it a lot. So I decided to bring my GameCube over with a few more games just in case he wanted to play something else. So I hook everything up and start the game. We play for a few hours, but then I remember I took the disc out the night before. So I go into my bag and check the Mario Sunshine case. Sure enough, the disc is in there, however the GameCube is still playing the game perfectly. So I open the disc tray, and as soon as I do, the screen glitches and the most terrifying loud screeching and beeping sound starts coming from the speakers. I freak out and immediately unplug the GameCube. I try turning it on again, but this time it actually says to insert disc. My cousin and I were trying to explain what happened, saying the GameCube must have just glitched. But the creepiest thing was when I was getting ready to leave. My little cousin came home from preschool and she walked up to me and said, "Mario told me he doesn't like it when you take him out." I died. I saw it, I lived it. Either it was another world with a version of me that died I saw, or I'm going crazy, but I died. We had a pep rally in school, and after it was finished we had to go back to class. Well, my friend and I were not into that, so we wanted to do across the street to Sonic. Across the school there is not heavy traffic, but if you don't pay attention you could get hit. Well, I remember walking with him and he dropped something, so I went across the street first. I just saw a red Tahoe heading right for me and I got hit. I remember everything. I remember gasping for air, I remember waking up and sleeping again. Then nothing. All of a sudden I was back in the stadium again and the exact same words came out of the principal's mouth. My friend wanted to go get Sonic, but I was freaking out. Was asking him everything. I thought it had to be a dream, so I went with him just to see what would happen. He dropped his stuff again and I waited. To my horror, that same red Tahoe showed up. I told him that I'm going back to school, I ain't dying again. I can still see the other version of me on that street, just messed up. Not even moving. 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a streetlight, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve/oyster thing which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend and it was hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor so he could pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me. I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my son's life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Eventually I worked out of the fear enough to grab my phone and text my husband to come in and turn on the lights and check under the bed. But holy shit, it boggles me how real it felt. I was about 12 years old, and woke up in the middle of the night needing to take a leak. I walked across the hall to the little bathroom, hit the lights, and was about to reach for the toilet when I glanced up and saw a face in the mirror. It was not my face. It was as if someone was on the other side, standing to the right, with their face right next to the glass, staring at me. I only saw it for the briefest moment, but it is seared into my brain. I screamed, and ran out of there to find my dad. Of course, my dad investigated, then calmed me down, or tried to. Eventually we had a prayer session, because I was so freaked out. Eventually I must have gone back to sleep. Fast forward to my 30s. I'd forgotten all about the event. One night while visiting, my dad quietly brings it up. "Remember that one time you saw a face in the mirror?" It suddenly came back to me in a rush of memory, sending a chill down my spine. "Yay, I remember." "Well," he said, "I sometimes think about that night." He looked down at the floor, with a serious expression. "I saw it too." He went on to describe exactly what I'd seen. We have no idea what that was. Apparently when he investigated, he saw it and had a freak out of his own. Apparently the prayer session was as much for his own nerves as mine. I respect him for keeping that tidbit from me till my 30s, but I kinda wish he'd never told me. You know, I never believed in ghosts, not really. I mean, sure, I was open to it, but I'm the kind of guy who likes proof. I annoyed my teachers and parents to death by always asking but why? I want a good, solid reason to believe something. But then I moved to southeast Missouri and saw some shit. Two things stand out. The first was my roommate having scratches in groups of 3 appear all over her when there was no one upstairs but her and I, and neither of our hands were anywhere near her back where they were appearing. The house was definitely an unsettling place to live, and turns out the original owner, a sick duck who molested a female relative, niece or daughter, record were unclear, was buried in the basement. He kept the girl in a closet and was very territorial of the house. I don't know how to explain it. That house has not had a steady occupant in a long time, though, and the owner has great difficulty renting it despite a cheap price and great location. It gives off such an unsettling vibe. Always feel like you're being watched. Lot of weird shit went down there, but that's the worst experience I had. I moved out shortly after. Duck that noise. The other was this blind curve on a back road going to my Mills house. Late night, tons of fog, deer and stupid drivers are common, so I'm going slow. All of a sudden, off to my right, there's this swinging yellowish light. About the right height off the ground for someone to be standing there holding it. Problem is, no one was there. I pulled up level with it and in an instant, it was gone. Nothing to reflect my lights was there, and nothing to mimic the movement. I got out, searched, nothing. I even went back up the road a bit and drove down again to see if I could recreate it. Nothing. Turns out, 2 sisters died there. A rather well-to-do family-owned land in the area in the boonies. Big estate, lots of acreage, nothing else around at the time. They took the curve too hard one night in their carriage and crashed. One sister died on impact. The other survived long enough to walk up and down the road, waving her lantern for anyone to see. They found her footprints all over in the morning, and her clutching the lantern. She was dead too. Locals have been known to see her lantern, but not her. Just that light, going back and forth. Sent chills down my spine when I heard that. The first week I moved into my new apartment, I woke up during the night for no apparent reason. I'm lying on my side, facing the wall, going through a mental checklist of what could have woken me up: bathroom, thirst, nausea, etc., when I feel a weight on the mattress, near my feet, exactly as if someone just sat at the end of the bed. I completely freeze and wait, staring straight at the wall next to the bed. The weight stays there, and a few seconds later, I feel another smaller dip in the mattress, close to my back, and almost immediately a third one in front of me, about hips level. It feels like someone is sitting at the edge of my bed, with their hands on either side of my body, staring at me. Eventually, the weights release one by one and the feeling of being watched go away. I slept on the couch for a week after that. I live in the woods, on the outskirts of a small suburb, on the outskirts of NYC. I'm just a few miles from town, but I only have one neighbor. There are 11 acres connected to my backyard and over 70 acres of government-owned land behind that. It's a whole load of woods. We have a patio in the backyard, looking out on a modest-sized yard and a wall of trees. Every night I end up back there, be it smoking a cigarette, staring at stars, or taking a leak. You can hear nothing but the sounds of the night, frogs croaking and crickets chirping. Usually. A few weeks ago, I was out on the back patio around midnight, when all of a sudden, as if a god's hand started turning up the volume on a massive speaker in the woods, gradually I began to hear music. It was very quiet at first, but after a few seconds, it was louder than normal speaking levels. The music was very ethereal, almost post-rock. It sounded a lot like Explosions in the Sky or the American Dollar, with no vocals or anything. It was louder than the AC next to me, and I could hear it through the walls when I went inside to see if it was my father forgetting the television was on. Nope. It got quieter as I got further from the backyard. There's nothing back there, literally miles of forest. After about half an hour, it slowly faded out, the same way it came into my world. To this day I have no idea what happened, it was so eerie. I've had a crazy thing happen. It was like 4 in the morning and I'm quite the night owl, so I'm headed downstairs to grab something to drink. The kitchen is separated from the living room by a dividing wall, but I realize someone is in there because I can see a person's shadow from around the corner. I think to myself, oh, roommate must be up already. Maybe he has something to do. So as I turn corner I say, hey. Good morning. And immediately feel like an idiot and get a chill up my spine because no one is in the kitchen besides me. I search the entire first floor of the house frantically and no one is there. So I head back upstairs and knock on my roommate's door. No answer, so I slowly open the door. Roommate is passed out asleep, and doesn't seem like he is waking up anytime soon. There is no way he could have made it back up to his room that fast without running, and I would have noticed because the floors are creaky, especially on the staircase. When he woke up in the morning, I told him about what had happened. His eyes got real wide and he turned pale. He looked me right in the eye and said, "That isn't a funny joke, don't duck with me." Turns out he had been having bad dreams all night about someone being in the house who shouldn't have been, but whenever he confronted the person he could never see their face, all that was there was a black silhouette. Haven't had that experience since, and we agree not to talk to each other about it. A couple of weeks ago my dog Coda came into my room and started to try to jump on my bed. Which she was successful of doing after a couple of tries, and I gave her a little nudge to get off my bed. She jumped down and left. Then I heard my phone downstairs, so I walked down and get a call from my grandma who said she made some food. So I said okay, I will stop by and come eat. I get my jacket on and get ready to leave. I got my keys and grabbed my dog's leash to take her. We got in the car, drove for about 10 minutes, and then arrived. I was eating and talking to my grandma and doing other things. But when I was getting ready to leave, I couldn't find Coda. I searched everywhere, in the backyard, in the front, outside, nowhere to be found. After a good hour of searching my grandma's neighborhood, it started to get dark, around 9:30-ish, so I decided to come back and check the next day. I left and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up because I heard something downstairs. To my surprise, it was my dog, and at that point, I thought, wait, what? Later, I came back to my grandma's to tell her I found my dog. As soon as I arrived, I told her. After I explained how Coda was at home, I thought to myself, did I even bring her? I asked my grandma, and she said yes, I did because I left the leash in her living room. I then asked my grandma to watch the footage on her cameras from last night, and there was no footage of Coda in the street or leaving the front door. But there was footage of her entering the house with me. I went home later, Coda was still there, and to this day, I still don't know what happened. Back when I was 18, my best friend and I were riding our bikes through the suburbs late at night. We were riding from the beach back to my house, which goes, beach, car park, main road, houses, park, houses, my house. We had just crossed the first section of houses, then the pond, then we had just started crossing through the second bunch of houses when we experienced a mother-ducking time warp back to the footpath that ran adjacent to the start of the first section of houses. I'm not religious, but I'm pretty adamant that Jesus Christ himself picked us up like chess pieces and put us there. We'd been riding side by side but in silence until then I said something along the lines of, "Holy shit, did you feel that?" To which he responded yes and explained the exact same feeling as I had before I explained to him. Still weirds me out so hard to this day. I was ice fishing with my friend and we got caught in a snowstorm. We were on Silver Lake in West Michigan, if you've heard of the dunes there. Well anyways, to get back, we had to go across the lake. It was a straight line, and I have walked the route plenty of times to know where the truck is. I was to the left of him with a lantern and he was pulling the sled with gear, switching every other minute or so. It's about a 30-minute walk and visibility is very poor. Halfway through, suddenly I get really dizzy. Then a burning sensation on my legs. And suddenly I was right where we were fishing before we left with my buddy next to me. The sled was there too. But the freakiest part was that our tracks out were still there, but no sign of us coming back. You could see where we switched to, so it was for sure us. Not that there was anyone else out there. We looked at each other wide eyes and recounted the burning and dizziness. We sheepishly followed the trail and when we reached the end, our tracks just simply stopped. Ducking scary. On the first night of my first job, I was driving home from work at about 1 a.m. My first job was washing dishes for a local restaurant if anyone cares. Apparently, while I was working, some of the thickest fog I have ever seen settled in. I was driving home in this fog, not even able to see a few feet in front of me, when I pulled up to the four-way intersection that leads to the road my house is on. This particular four-way intersection is marked by a blinking red street light. It's also the only light on the entire street. So here I am, driving through the heaviest fog of my life, on my way home from a crazy night at work, with nothing to light the road. I lived in a small country town, so most roads didn't have street lamps, but my worthless headlights, and the blinking red street light off in the distance. As I creep up to the blinking red light, lo and behold my headlights reveal a single mallard duck standing perfectly still in the middle of the intersection directly under the blinking red street light. At this point I wasn't sure if I was fatigued or crazy cause it was 1 a.m. So I began to wonder if it was real, because it was just so weird and was standing perfectly still, so I honked at it. The duck slowly turned its head and stared at me. This was some eerie shit, man, only me, a duck, heavy fog, and an ominous blinking red light at 1 o'clock in the morning, and to make it worse it was staring at me. Me and the duck were locked in eye contact for a solid minute until I slowly made my turn, the duck's gaze following me as I went, careful not to run him over, and I returned home, not believing what I just saw. To this day, I search for that duck every time I pull up to that intersection, in the hopes that I will get one more look at the mysterious intersection duck of legend, but I never saw him again. Stopped at the gas station on my way to work one morning. I take out my debit card and take my car keys with me and leave everything in the car. Pay for my stuff and throw my debit card in the metal cup I have in my car. Literally half a second later I look down and my card is gone. Pulled apart everything trying to look for it and couldn't find it. I go to work and go home to find it sitting on my desk. Double checked my bank account to make sure it was the card I used, and it was. To this day I still have no idea what happened. In late September or early October 2000, my parents had just put in a separate building in behind our house for my recording studio purposes, and just to get away from everyone should I need it. We had bought a Radio Shack intercom system if either of us needed to reach each other when I was out in the studio. One night, I was working on music and had headphones on, so I didn't hear my mom calling me on the intercom. I needed a restroom break and grab a drink from the fridge, so I walked into the house. As soon as I hit the door, my mom came into the living room, angry as hell, and proceeded to inform me that if I ever did that again, she'd whip me from then to 2008 and back again. I honestly didn't know what she was talking about, but she didn't believe me. Finally, when I myself got angry and said some choice words/phrases of my own, she realized I had no clue what she was talking about. Turns out, while I was out working in the studio, she heard me screaming for help over and over outside her bedroom windows where she was located at the time. By the time she checked out her windows and the doors and couldn't see me, she tried to reach me via intercom, which I didn't hear. She was getting herself ready to go looking outside and come knock on the studio door as I walked through the door. She insisted it was my voice, no mistake about it, screaming and pleading for help outside the house. It wasn't the first time one or more of the family had witnessed strange activity, at that house or the previous house I grew up in from birth until I was around 11 to 12 years old. But we were both so freaked out by what happened, she watched me from the back door to quickly go out to the studio and make sure all of my equipment was turned off and the studio door was locked, and I ran back as quick as I could back into the house so we could be together just in case that, or something worse, happened again. I still get chills every time I think about it. I work as a security/nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories and one of the oldest buildings in the city. One night I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 a.m., and I answer, "Hello, this is Draven at the front desk, how can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounded female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person I couldn't understand them, and asked what apartment they were in, but again garbled response and 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them and the same response, I said since I couldn't understand them I'd come up and to meet me in the hallway. So I go to the main elevators, and both are up on the, surprise, 23rd floor. Luckily, we have an older service elevator and it's only on the 7th floor, so I call it down. I get it and hit the button for the 23rd floor, but it won't move and the inner door won't close, so I go to unlock the reset panel and boom, we start going up, door still open. I'm freaking out, and the elevator is shaking because it goes pretty fast and is old. As I'm going up, I just stay towards the back and finally I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now I head the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are, and when I get to them they are just sitting there with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it could just be the elevators on the fritz, so I get in and figure I'll just reset them when I get to floor 1 when I hear the sound of the back stairwell closing. So I quickly get out and go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, no one's there, but the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar, and at that time I'm the only one in the building with a key. At the top of the building is a large machine room housing all the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into it because it's creepy as duck and no one ever goes there, so at this point I'm seriously freaked out, but I muster up and head in. I shout hello? And there's no response. The lights in this room flicker because they're shitty fluorescent, so I can't see well either. But at the end of the room I can make out the roof access door, and sure as shit, it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by, and there's no one there, so I open the roof access door. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there is a slight wrap around, and if there was a jumper or something I needed to be sure, so I step out and leave the door ajar like it was. Almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now I might have written it off as wind or something, but this door is hard to shut and hard to open, really hard. I immediately grab the handle and hank it open, slam it behind me and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too and go back to the 23rd floor hallway, get into an elevator, doors still open, and go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up, don't say a word, and sure as hell garbled voice again, only audibly saying 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happen at this building. It's basically like the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past a dark room here on the first floor once and swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night, as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off and I turn around to see a quick flash of myself walking past.